Okay, hi there. My name is Edwin Bakker. I'm part of the team that provides this course, Terrorism and Counterterrorism, Comparing Theory and Practice. And now we have the Google Hangout. We have 5 participants. I will introduce you to them shortly. The procedure is as follows. They have come up with a number of interesting questions, and I will give them the floor to formulate these questions. I will have a first reaction and then others will react. But you have also, other participants have the opportunity to react as well, so you can add a question, and then some of our team members, Janine, will have a look at that and see where it would fit in discussion, and will ask her regularly to see what other people out there have come up with. So let me start now by introducing the 5 participants. Marloes van Baren from the Netherlands. You have a background, a very interesting background. You are a research editor, interested in ecology. You play the violin.
I don't know. I have a background in cultural sciences and.
I know, at Tilburg University. I saw that, but you work for that company, and then you play the violin.
Yeah.
And you're an Olympic weightlifter, so that's an interesting background. And then we also have Raluca Maria Nisuara. Did I pronounce that well? Yeah, sort of. You live in Dublin, but you have a background from Romania, I think Transylvania, if I'm correct. You have a master's degree in the management of international relations and European policy. And you have an interest in, I think, if I read it well in your dissertation, the relationship between the European Union and Japan, cooperation in the domain of education. Then we have Martin Dickey, who is in sunny California, a trained biologist, an expert on security issues and teaching at Westwood College at Upland in California. And I liked one of the projects you were working on. A terrorist attack on the court system of the United States, potential and effect. So that sounds very interesting. And then Marc Setnaoui from France, born in France or born in Egypt. Anyway, Marc, welcome. A mechanical engineer student interested in science and industry, but also in design and social media. And that social media element we're going to see in a few minutes from now. And then Desh Deepak Khanna from India. Welcome, Desh. You're an editor and publisher of a monthly magazine called The Competition Master, which covers study material on current affairs for various competitive exams in India. Allow me to give the floor first to Marloes, and you have a question related to crisis communication and the relation between, or the role of the media and how it can lead to fear or not. Marloes, the floor is yours. Please go ahead.
Yes, I was wondering about the communication strategies in public diplomacy employed by counterterrorism organizations, academics, politicians, and whether or not that is deployed optimally. Or would there be room for improvement? And if so, where do you see that room for improvement?
Well, thank you very much. It's a very topical question. Of course, we have seen lots of events in Syria, in Iraq, and many countries are connected to what's happening out there because they have joined a coalition to attack Islamic State. And that raises a number of questions whether or not that will increase the threat level in these countries, and a number of these countries, well, the governments, have come up with warnings to the general public. And you might wonder if that has been very successful. Has it been successful in keeping the peace, keeping people feeling safe against terrorism, or did it create panic or anxiety? Can we improve it, and how? I think we gradually learn from these kind of the way we have to deal with these kind of incidents or activities. But fortunately for Europe, not that much has happened. So I'm also very much interested in the answers to your questions. How do the authorities communicate about terrorism, and whether that's effective or not? Does it make people more worried or less worried? I think we can learn more from, for instance, India. Mark, I'm not sure how much you are still connected to Egypt, but I might be interested in that. And I guess also for the United States, it's relevant. Like, how do we communicate about terrorism, about the terrorist threat? In the Netherlands, it's substantial. Okay, don't know exactly what it is. And then lately, because of our involvement in the attacks on IS, it's a little bit more than substantial, or a little bit higher. Well, what to think of that? I think other countries have more experience, partly because they have more terrorist incidents. So maybe Dash, what's your take on that? What do you think? How do the Indian authorities communicate about terrorism? Are you satisfied with that, or do you think they make it bigger than it is?
In India, I think they don't. They keep it the way it should be. They try to use the media, the social media, as well as the TV and newspapers to communicate with the general public about the attacks. Of course, the media, as in any other place, outplays any incident that happens here more than it should. But at the same time, I think we have a lot of think tank groups. We have discussions in which they try to put forward the message that don't be too perturbed by an incident, because you're playing into the hands of terrorists if you are getting too perturbed about it.
Thank you. So they are aware of it. That's good to know. But Marloes, what do you think yourself? I mean, this question, of course, you raised maybe because of some recent statements from your own government. So what's your take on this?
Well, I felt the effect was quite fear-evoking. You had a newspaper posting a picture, very random, of a train conductor with and it was ridiculed right away also on social media. When they put a caption over it, he was worried about terrorists, and it was just a random picture. So I think that counter movement is very good. It's kind of a grassroots development that I think is happening and would be very positive. I do feel that when you look at public diplomacy and using communication strategy as a way of counter-programming, of reaching out in general to the public and to people at risk of radicalizing or potentially becoming so in the future, I don't see a lot of that. Just as a citizen, consumer of media, I think we could do a lot more.
Yeah, interesting take to stress the role of citizens to partly react and to balance somehow the way governments talk about it. I can assure you today we had also talks here at our institute with some spokespersons from government authorities that they very much want to try to not make it bigger than it is, don't want to worry people and don't want to give terrorists really what they want. I've room for one more remark. Mark, perhaps, I'm not sure, do you still have a lot of contacts with Egypt, so what's your take on it? Having probably some links with both worlds. Peaceful France, being scared maybe too much, and then Egypt that is really tormented by a lot of political violence.
For sure. In the past recent years, Egypt has, I think, has made the terrorism have given a bigger picture for terrorism, as it has made has controlled the media and said that we have a war on terror last year, but I think they have given too much attention to it. But of course, as you said in one of your videos, that the people should not be feared from terrorism, but at the same time, we shouldn't give so much weight and propaganda against terrorism.
Yeah, thank you. Of course, maybe the Egyptian government sometimes benefits from making terrorism bigger than it is, and of course pointing at certain groups, you know, labeling them terrorists and others not. But there I think is also a political, more political aspect to it. With an eye on the clock, let's move to the second question by Raluca. Please, you have a question regarding the disapproval of IS, Islamic State, active in Syria and Iraq, by Muslim communities. Please go ahead.
Yeah, my question was regarding the latest development in the international politics, and I was wondering whether this disapproval by the Muslim community and Muslim states may become an opportunity for the Western society to perceive this as an approach to the Muslim communities.
Yeah, thank you very much. A very sensitive question also, because if you're a Muslim and you're confronted with IS that's committing horrible crimes in the name of your religion, that puts you in a very difficult situation. On the one hand, you feel you have nothing in common with these people. On the other hand, people do so in the name of your religion. And a lot of people are not from Muslim background. They probably associate a lot of violence with Islam. Of course, the British Prime Minister has said something about this link after the killing of James Foley. He said, you know, these people are not Muslims, they are monsters. Islam is peace. He mentioned that. A lot of people say, well, I'm not so sure. I see these horrible pictures. And there has been some movements, also on the internet social movement, people that say, not in my name. But in other countries it has been relatively silent, and rightly or wrongly so. A lot of Muslims say, well, why should I react? I mean, these are not my people. I'm not responsible for that. So your assumption is that many Muslims have said no to IS violence, but this has not been the case everywhere, and not very massively. So I liked your question, and I think if that would be the case, it would allow for a lot more communication and a lot more dialogue between different faiths and different communities. But if you put your question the other way around, saying if there's a lack of this disapproval, it could lead to stereotypes. It could strengthen the idea of what has been called the clash of civilizations. So it's a sensitive topic. So I liked it very much, and yes, I think there's opportunities. If this would happen, we would be able to start a dialogue, and I think it's happening in some places, but not everywhere. Maybe Mark, can I have your reaction to that? Being from the United States, one of the key actors in the field with regard to how to deal with IS.
Well, part of the issue I see in this is the role the media plays in it. I know that'll be a question later that we talk about. Here in the United States, there was not a lot of media coverage of what I read from Muslim sources about talking about how the beheading was wrong. I think that gives that issue of silence, and of course, if there's silence, does that mean approval? And so that imaging becomes a major issue, I think. We just had the beheading in Oklahoma, and of course, what did the news cover? They covered the statement from the Oklahoma Muslim Foundation saying they hope it didn't have retaliation in their community. They didn't cover any of the other statements that they made. I see that as an issue.
Could you mention that this happened at a factory, I believe? Could you explain this Oklahoma beheading?
Yes. Within the last week or so, you had an employee who had some type of disciplinary action against him. He leaves that office, goes to the main office. He confronts the first lady he sees and stabs her to death and then beheads her. And then he starts an attack on a second lady. He's confronted by a manager there who is armed and ends up killing, or ends up shooting him. And he was then captured. And although the facts are still coming out, it appears that it was Islamically based in the things that he was saying at that time. And I see that type of fear by silence to be an issue here in the United States.
Yeah, thank you. So it's really a very, so you raised the question, I think it's an excellent question, but you see that there's so many elements to it, because now one person in Oklahoma can have a strong effect about how many people in other parts of the world look at this. So this was even used in the Netherlands. I mean, it's one person who does something very stupid, very violent in Oklahoma, in the middle of nowhere in the United States, and it's got a worldwide impact, and it's connected, I think, in the eyes of many, to what's happening in Iraq and Syria. So I don't think I have an answer to your question, Luca, but maybe you want to have a last reaction to what has been said so far about this link between, or maybe the need, or not, of Muslim communities to say, no, this is not in my name, and to what extent that creates opportunities to have a dialogue, or actually an obstacle to dialogue.
Yeah, so my main point was regarding the communication that I think that is not existent between the Western countries and the Muslim communities. I always thought, when I saw the discussion, the dialogue between them, that there's a problem in communication, in seeing the other as a real partner for this communication, that can be a communication between cultures, between religions, between states, and between different types of politics at the international level and also at the national level.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, good point. So I think maybe one of the conclusions is that we have to do a lot more about that. I mean, there's really worlds that look at each other with lots of stereotypes, etc., and these beheadings have become a symbol of have become a serious obstacle in the way we look at each other and the way we talk to each other, or not. May I now ask Martin to put forward, to come up with his question. Your question was linked to modern-day terrorism and the nation states. Please, Martin.
Yes. My question was whether or not the modern-day terrorism we see today is actually the antithesis to the concept of the nation state. The nation state being kind of the Western model, that citizens are in fact to be controlled and are responsible to the nation state. I base that upon the anarcho movements of the 1800s and early 1900s. The egalitarianism that we see in the nation state and the centrally controlled governments, we see that being propagated through the First and Second World Wars, through the Cold War, but now what we see is that de-evolution of the nation state. In those areas in which we're seeing that de-evolution, we're seeing new models, and the terrorism is becoming part of that new model system, and it's going to be hard for nation states to, I think, control that particular aspect, especially with the loss of information due to the information age.
Yeah, thank you. Interesting question. Terrorist organizations, or let's say the ideas they want to implement as an alternative to the current state system, is that in many ways the total opposite of what the current state and the current world system looks like. I think if you look at Islamic State, that's actually very much the case, and it's very ironic actually that Islamic State calls itself Islamic State, and then one of its strongest opponents is the Arab League. So you got, in many ways, this Islamic State says, you know, we don't recognize the states as they exist today. We want something else based on other rules, other systems. So I think if you refer to the current, you know, hotly debated group, Islamic State, I think there is a point there. But then the ironic thing is that their alternative, what do they call their alternative? Again, a state, Islamic State. It seems like we find it very difficult to come up with real alternatives. And if you look at most terrorist organizations, for instance, also in India, what they want is actually to topple a regime and take over the state. So in the end, I wonder if there are many terrorist organizations that really provide an alternative. Yes, they pose a challenge to the state, very much so. because states cannot control the entire area, and there are swaths of parts of the country where there's minorities or difficult to control, so the state failure is a problem. But surprisingly, few terrorist organizations provide that alternative. Very often they want to create a state of their own, separatist organizations, nationalist organizations, or want to take over the government and impose a different, let's say, socio-economic or political system. But few really provide, I think, a real alternative. Maybe the exception is Islamic State, but then strangely enough they call themselves a state, but then partly on different principles. Maybe Desh, with your background in your Indian background, you have many different terrorist organizations in your country. To what extent do they really try to offer an alternative to the existing order? And I'm not only referring to the separatist groups or the Islamist groups, but also the so-called Naxalites, let's say more left-wing oriented groups in the center of India. Is that something, is that a question I could ask you to have a look at? So to what extent are terrorist organizations really the alternative or opposite of the current system? Desh, please.
Well, if you take the Naxalites, yes, they are trying to put in they have a left-wing Marxist ideology which they want to put into the political system. But most of the other terrorist organizations who've been, or separatist organizations, have been fighting for what was a kingdom some 100 years ago, or what was a tribal area some 200 years ago before India became united into a one country. And they want that area, their customs, their tribal customs to be protected, and they're fighting for that. And they don't want, like, it's also a war between the natives and the non-natives in that area. For example, in the eastern part of India, we have a lot of separatist movements or terrorist movements because there is a fight between the natives and the non-natives, which have been there since last 200 years, and they are economically much more well off, and the natives are not. So it's a fight, economic fight between the natives and the non-natives. As far as the Middle East is concerned, I think that all these organizations were actually some 40-50 years back trying to topple autocratic regimes. For example, Saudi Arabia or Iraq or Syria, where they didn't have a democratic government. And when they could not topple them because of the support to these regimes from Western governments, I think, they took to terrorism as a tool to fight and put in their own regime, or they wanted these kings and these autocrats to be out. That is my take on what is happening in the Middle East.
Thank you. Janine, I've been informed that there's a question from the audience that is partly linked to this. Is that correct?
Yes, we have a question from Chan Hoing Cheong, if I pronounce it right. I don't think so. But he asked, do you think ISIS is considered a success because it has generated so much fear and has reached a global audience and has now actually established a state or a caliphate in Syria and Iraq? So can we consider it a success, or how would you look at that?
My short answer is a yes, but maybe I would like to also direct this question to Mark. Do you think it is, IS, in many ways a success because it creates an alternative to the existing system? And is that maybe an explanation of its success?
I would say my short answer would be also yes, because right now they have conquered at least 1/3 of Syria and a lot of lands in Iraq. And for now they have actually built what they want to say a state, which they want to establish farms, markets, they want to establish offices, tourism, not really tourism, but other offices that would serve their people. They are using, they want to embed their ideas as the Sharia into their state, and they want only one core idea, which is the Sharia. I would call it a temporary success, but it won't last forever.
All right, thank you. Martin, do you think IS, and whether that's temporary or not, many countries try, of course, to make it as temporary as possible, given the current attacks. Let's see how that's going to play out, work out. Mark, you mentioned there's a different way on which the state is built, Sharia law, etc., but still it's called a state. To what extent, Martin, do you think it is still an alternative to the Westphalian system, or not? Or do you have other examples of that?
Well, I think that it is an alternative to the Westphalian system that we use in nation states. I don't think it is a state yet, but only because they have yet to really rule without conflict. I think that becomes the measure of whether or not that they can actually rule or not. They're very important in the power vacuum that is happening in the Middle East, and I can see their model expanding actually throughout the Middle East because it is a very effective model in that part of the world.
Well, of course, we have to wait and see. I mean, there are many forces out there that don't want to wait and see too long. Also, of course, yesterday Turkey announced that it's going to use, that's prepared to use violence. They also, I think today, said that they will by all means prevent this northern town Kobane to fall into the hands of IS. So we'll have to wait and see what's going to happen. I guess IS itself very much wants to show that it is an alternative to the current system, but I guess the way they do it, that the number of supporters is limited, and of course especially among all kinds of groups that do not fit into that state, and that's still quite a large group in the Middle East. So we have to wait and see what's happening. But thank you, Martin, for that question. Then we move on to the third question by Mark. You had a question. Let me go to the relationship between IS, so we stick to the topic a little bit, and social media. And you also have an interest in social media, I saw from your CV. So what is the question, Mark? Please go ahead.
So I was following several accounts of IS fighters, or what they call themselves, Mujahideen, and in January 2014. And it seems like for IS there's two types of accounts. Personal accounts, which is the personal fighters that they tweet from their houses, from the place of battle, and they tweet their daily life. They once saw someone playing video games of Call of Duty, someone eating, they were playing, and also some disturbing images of killing other people in comments and their enemies. And the second type of account is the account of the Islamic State, which they publish their reports and how they publish their other, basically the reports of how many people they captured, how many bombs they thrown, how many lands they conquered, and you can see it in websites just such as Just Pasted, which allows people to put text and images. And my question would be, is this social media type is more for spreading terror across the countries, or for attracting new investors and fighters to fight with the Islamic State?
Thank you. Yeah, there might be more goals than just one. So on the one hand, spreading fear, and on the other hand, to attract fighters and money, support, etc., or maybe recruit others. I think it's both, and in many ways the sad thing is that by this spreading fear and showing pictures of horrible beheadings and other killings is also attracting new foreign fighters. So sometimes it has this double role. These images that have been uploaded horrible pictures. I guess a lot of people would say, how on earth is it possible that this will attract more foreign fighters? But it seems to be the case. Not much research has been done in that into that field, like how people react to these images. I know some studies from Germany. It's some mixed results, but if you're open to this kind of violence and propaganda, it shows also strength, and they're on the winning side. And look, the world is afraid of us. And look, we can, by the way we kill people, we can make sure that the president of the strongest country in the world, the United States, will have to come back from his holiday resort to address the nation or address the journalist about the killing of James Foley, for instance. So these images are very powerful. I think you rightly described the many different ways in which they use propaganda, both on the individual side, like what's happening in the battlefields or in normal life, what's happening behind the front lines, and at the same time you have the more official propaganda. And I think they all address a different public, and I think they're very, unfortunately, successful. They attract a lot of people. I think in the end, a lot of these pictures of brutality might instill fear, but have also, of course, helped to build coalitions against IS. So I'm not sure. Maybe it's a boomerang effect. It will backfire. We'll have to wait and see. But I think it's both, and especially it's very difficult to imagine how these horrible pictures can attract young people from going there. And at least in my country, and some people that we have spoken to, whose family members have gone there, we find it incredible to believe that, but these pictures don't stop people from going there. So it attracts both. May I ask, Marleen, you had I'm sorry, do I pronounce it? Marloes, sorry. You also had a question regarding communication. What's your take on this, the way IS uses propaganda and the relationship with spreading fear?
Yeah, it's, I was thinking about it when Mark formulated his question. It seems like on the ISIS side, they really deploy all kinds of uses for social media, and I don't know who's behind it, but it seems they're doing a good job. I mean, just considering strategically how they deploy communication tools. And I wonder if we counter that enough, and if we should, perhaps, or leave it aside, or...
No, this question... Oh, sorry.
Yeah, I don't really have an answer to it, but it is something I wonder about. Is for example, when it comes to programming, putting out the message there that is attracting young people from, for example, our country, the Netherlands. And I see our country hugely failing in providing counter-programming and another attractive alternative. I think we fail. I think a large part of our youngsters, of which a few, unfortunately, are tempted to radicalize.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I like your take that if you talk about we, you don't talk about the government, but society and youngsters. I think that's a good take, because I don't think the government can provide counter narratives. They can tell the story like how they look at it. They can maybe help certain groups to be more active on the internet or get more tools and more technological help. But in the end, it's the people have to say, come up with an alternative. As been mentioned also by Raluca, some Muslim communities have an important role to play. So it's difficult. They really do very little. They try, take notice and take down. They have some tools to monitor what's going on and go to providers and say, guys, do you know there's pictures of beheadings on your website? I'm not sure if you want that. Look at your regulations and look at your rules of how to use the internet. So we would like to ask you to remove that, but it's very difficult. So Maybe Raluca, you looked into the way Muslim communities also reacted to IS. Do you think they do enough? Do you think that that would be a good alternative? Other people reacting on what's going on to counter the propaganda of IS?
Personally, I believe that the reaction of the Muslim communities all over the world is a step forward. It's also better than nothing, than just looking and with the silence accept everything. But I believe that the situation from the Gaza and from Syria raise important question about how much that specific organization ISIS represent the people from there, how much they represent their views, how much the government that they intend to put in place will represent the interest and the needs of the people.
That's a good point. We also have to be careful. Those that are most active on the internet not necessarily represent most people. And that also gives, of course, lots of other citizens the opportunity to maybe come up with more counter narratives, but we have to be careful there. I also personally, when I watch a lot of these videos, it makes me sad or angry or, yeah, I don't know, lots of emotions. We have to be careful. Like, what do we see? Do we see a fraction of certain groups, or do we see mainstream society? I think we see a fraction, but sometimes very difficult to determine. And of course, I personally hope to see more counter voices, and maybe governments helping other people to raise their voice and say no to IS. Janine, you had there was a question from the public that's watching this. Please let me know.
Yeah, we have another question from the audience of Tracy Bennick, and she's asking about motivations of foreign fighters. And her question is, why is there a lack of forward thinking in regards to human loss? And does the camaraderie and the self-glorification of individuals, of foreign fighters, override their desire for a future? So why do they join? And why don't they realize that their actions actually degrade their religion? So why do they join? Why don't they think about their future?
Interesting question. We're just recording the last part of this course, which is on foreign fighters. But this question is very specific, very difficult to answer. It assumes that those that go there have a clear rational and agenda, and that they can see the higher goal of what they are fighting for, and that they are aware of all kinds of side effects of their behavior. And I'm afraid many are not. Many are not in there for a higher goal, but for personal goals, for glory, or to go to paradise, which in many ways the way they do it sounds like you know, a solution to their problems. So they're not so much concerned. So I would not raise that question with regard to the individual foreign fighter, but more to the groups that accept these people, among them very violent, very politically unaware, religiously, I think, very shallow figures that believe that they can do everything in the name of Islam. On the other hand, these same organizations do allow that. So I would raise the question more with regard to these organizations. And well, the sad thing is that I think the leadership of IS don't care about what the rest of the world thinks about it. They see the direct advantage of spreading fear. So there doesn't seem to be any hold on, you know, more decent behavior, which is of course very worrisome. That's probably the reason why a number of states, headed by the United States, says, you know, there's just no way we can talk to these guys. We can only, and they only know and understand the language of violence. So be careful with trying to think of foreign fighters as people with that have properly thought of what they're doing there, what the consequences are. And many are in there for personal gains and don't care about the image of Islam, or probably would say, well, you know, the West and other people have a negative image anyway, so, you know, what the hell. So it's a difficult question. but again, I would lift it. I would bring it to a higher level and raise that same question with regard to the leadership of some of these organizations. With an eye on the clock, we're doing fine. But I would like now to give Dash the floor. You had an interesting question, and you partly already touched upon it. It's the link between, or the development, the transformation between from a civil war movement to a terrorist organization. Please, can you elaborate on that and formulate the question, Dash? The floor is yours.
Yeah. Over a period of time, one has seen movements like Taliban, even ISIS, and some in India also, which started as a separatist movement or a civil war movement to fight the oppressive or a foreign regime. But over a period of time, maybe they became weak or they lost focus and they became terror organizations or started using terror as a tool for their cause. It also became that a lot of vested interests and infiltrated into these organizations, even foreigners, and that made these organizations more of a terror organizations than civil war organizations. Now my question is, at what point does a civil war movement gets converted into a terrorist organization? If we can know about this, maybe we can, the nations of this world can work to stop funding them or helping them if they become from a civil war to a terrorist organization.
Thank you. Can you use the mute button? Dash.
Sorry?
Can you use the mute button? I can still hear you. Yeah.
Espen, you're still on mute now.
Good, thank you. Yeah, I'm keeping switching these buttons. Thank you. Interesting question. It's both about, let's say, development of movements, of networks, of groups that start with a different agenda, using certain ways of violence into organizations with that use terror, or what a lot of people would describe as terror, to achieve certain goals and maybe even change their goals. And also the nature of the organization changes because of the influence of foreign elements, foreign fighters, etc. That's a very interesting question as such. Like, how does that work? Under what conditions does that change? But of course, your question also relates to the debate about the definition of terrorism. When is a civil war movement or group called a terrorist? I think a lot of civil war organizations have been called a terrorist organization after 9/11 because it gave the governments a lot of opportunities to get help to fight these organizations from other countries, to get help from other countries. So it's partly a definition problem. At the same time, and I guess the examples you mentioned, like IS, but especially Taliban, is a difficult one. The Taliban has been regarded a rebellious group. Then it's been called a terrorist organization, but lately many countries, including the United States, try to stay away from that term, use the term opposing forces, but want to be very careful in using that term terrorism, because they realize that one day, and especially after withdrawal from Afghanistan, they might have to talk to these organizations. So it's a lot about labeling as well. But I do see your point that organizations change over time. And when did that happen? I don't know. I don't know if there's really factors or stages, but I do see that sometimes organizations, they have been struggling for a long time, and there's a new leadership, and they need more input, they need new input, they need more money. And that's where, for instance, certain Islamist groups come in, and they might seize the opportunity to turn, let's say, a Kashmir separatist organization into a Kashmir jihadist organization with a larger agenda. I think it's partly also related to failure of some local groups to achieve their goals, and then outside forces come in and take the opportunity. Might even say this is the case for Algeria, where there has been a struggle going on for a long, long time. Then Al-Qaeda joined a local group, and it gave new life to that group. So interesting, these developments, but I think you have to look at them from case to case, and that there's no general answer to that. Maybe, who can I ask to reflect on that? Martin, do you have yeah?
Sure. I look at that issue as more of that terrorism becomes a tactic that's used either as a secondary or as a primary. That doesn't necessarily mean they're a terrorist group. If we look at the history, terrorism has been back to, the 1950s as part of a piece of any separatist movement. So to me, it's a factor of how they identify that particular strategy within their movement. And I think any group that is losing any type of civil war at some point will move more towards the terrorism side. And we've seen several groups, you mentioned Algeria, for instance. They started out as a separatist movement, they ended up as a terrorist, and they went back to a separatist. They had several different waves, as you would normally occur. And I see that as kind of the norm that we're seeing. The problem is, just like you said, after 9/11, we have a tendency to default to the terrorism aspect first, without really looking at the evolution that is going on.
Yeah, and even today, we can of course describe IS as a terror organization or terrorist organization. I think the word terror organization might be a better word to use. But at the same time, it's a state, it's a social movement, and it's an uprising to some. Many people who are now fighting under the IS flag in Iraq are local tribes that are fed up with the regime in Baghdad, and that use the banner of IS far more than that they have, that they are eternal partners of IS. So it's very complicated, and as the case of IS show, that local parties sometimes think this is the opportunity. They're very opportunistic, and they take on this flag and accept the support of IS. Whereas their goal might be something quite different. So it's a very, how this development of groups from rebel organization or even civil rights organization into terrorism, it's very complicated. And again, you have to look at it case by case. But it would be interesting for, let's say, more larger research, looking historical development of organizations. There are not many studies. Maybe Libicki, like How Terrorism Ends, looks a little bit at it, but it might need more in-depth studying, because we see that throughout the globe with regard to these organizations that last longer, that they change in the way they are called, the way they act, their goals, and so it's a good question, and I think it requires maybe a lot of research, more of a PhD dissertation than just a quick answer from my side. Dash, do you have anything? Could you react on this?
No, nothing more to say. I think what you've summed up is absolutely correct. The only thing which I would like to add to it is that if somehow the nations can come to some sort of an agreement that a terrorist a civil war movement has become into a terrorist organization, then maybe they can stop help and funding and moral support to it, and that could help to nip it in the bud, as to say, before it turns too violent.
Yeah, thank you. Well, I think, of course, what happened in Syria and Iraq is a good warning for a lot of governments and people who sponsored certain groups. Let's not mention certain names of countries or organizations, but I think a lot of people now have realized that if you support these kind of groups, if you don't stop with that, you really run into trouble, because these organizations can change very rapidly, as we've seen in the case of IS, in size and nature and in composition. So what you support one day might really, and might be on your side, might be your opponent in a very short period of time and a lot stronger than you might expect. So being careful, more careful, and paying more attention to, let's say, government support or support by certain organizations to terrorist or rebel organizations is something that well, hardly needs mentioning after seeing what's happening in Syria and Iraq. Janine, you have a last question from the audience?
Yeah, there's a question from Jason Lefebvre, and he asked about ISIS. Well, he actually asked if it's more effective if a local party, like similar to the Ba'athist party in Iraq, might help to destabilize ISIS. Is that more effective than a foreign intervention if local groups, well, come to say that they don't accept this?
Yeah, interesting, a very topical question, partly related to what I just said. But maybe I would like to give others the opportunity to you have been studying terrorism. Now there's this global coalition that tries to fight IS. This question relates to an alternative. Do we need, let's say, F-16s and other fighter jets bombarding IS, or do we maybe have to invest in local groups that resist IS, or maybe local groups that now are partly under the banner of IS, try to convince them to switch sides? Who may I give the floor? Please just use the button to speak up.
Professor, I would say that we need to watch how we do it. I am a firm believer that we have to have boots on the ground that are local, because they understand the people and the culture, whereas we may not, coming from a Western world. But I also look at some of the failures in Libya. We're now watching that country spiral into a civil war, and you know, we see the same thing happening in Iraq. Obviously, the civil war in Syria has totally devolved. So I don't see an easy solution, because invariably whoever we empower to stand as boots on the ground, we can make them strong enough that they will take their own agenda through goal displacement at the very end.
Yeah, it's risky. It has been tried before to fight IS, partly with success, to arm local militias in 2006, 2007, I think, or 2008 has been quite successful. But a lot of people say, well, it created like new enemies, new coalitions. And as a journalist from Iraq, from The Guardian, that I met last week, said about just investing, if we do so, we invest in the next wave of violence that will happen in 5 years' time. But nonetheless, I think in the end, you know, solving it from the air is impossible. We need boots on the ground, but ad hoc coalitions, I think we have to be very careful. But I'm a strong proponent of the Westphalian system. I think in the end, you know, we need to have a monopoly of violence of the state. But there are cases, like in Iraq, especially with the previous government, the state is not willing to include some of the rebels and some of the groups they represent. So I'm not sure if there is one solution. But in the end, I think basically F-16s and other fighter jets will not do the work. So we need local groups to take action as well. But again, you know, there's a risk that it will lead maybe to temporary solutions, but not a lasting one. Anyone else who wants to react on that, or wants to have a final word about the current situation or the situation in his or her country? We have 4 minutes, but I would love to hear any reaction from you or any remark, and if not, then we'll close the session. But last opportunity. Who may I give the floor? Dash, please, go ahead.
Yep, we've just been through the last week's assignment. I think a holistic approach is required. You need to fight them, as well as you need to address the political and social problems of the region to get this region back into the mainstream and to have some sort of a peace over there. Just sending F-16s or just and I think the fight, as far as the actual war is concerned with these militant groups, is to be done by a legitimate government. You can't be funding or arming the militias. Because then it will be a position like you have in Afghanistan. After you leave, the militias start fighting each other. So it has to be a one single government which is representative of the entire region, which is then helped to fight this organization.
Somebody wants to react on that? Do we have these governments out there? Is there one Syrian government? Is there one Iraqi government who could do that? Mark?
Well, I think that arming other rebels, and for example, in Syria, they have armed the Free Syrian Army, and others have armed the Islamic State, and others have armed and provided arms for the governments for the Syrian government, have created such a proxy war, would have said. And I don't think providing much arms would help. And I also think that a holistic approach is needed to at least decrease terrorism in the area.
Well, thank you very much. Yeah, I guess we can agree on the holistic approach, but then where to start? I like your remark, Mark, and also by Dash, by providing weapons to all kinds of groups. In the end, it's not going to work. That's partly what we're doing, and we is actually all relevant actors from Russia to the United States, and even the Netherlands is providing certain support to Kurds. That might sound, you know, like the best option in the short run, but in the long run, we need a wider approach. The problem, of course, is that in the short run, a lot of people are going to die, and there you have to find a balance somehow between, let's say, an opportunistic short-term solution and a long-term holistic approach. Well, let's hope that the smart people in governments find that solution. We academics can only, you know, provide examples or some of the lessons learned that from cases that we've studied. But of course, it's a hell of a job. It's extremely complex. But let's hope that that the situation will improve. It can hardly be worse than it is today. And of course, my heart goes out to all the people in Iraq and Syria that suffer so much, and all these people in refugee camps, and Jordan and Lebanon and Turkey that are crowded with all these refugees that have to deal with that. So, having said that, I would like to thank all the participants, Dash, Marloes, Raluca, Martin, Mark. Thank you very much for your participation. Thank you for your excellent questions, and I hope you enjoyed the discussion. And I hope that we'll have a next Google Hangout in a few weeks from now. We will have a Google Hangout with a number of experts, and I very much enjoyed your participation and also the questions from the audience. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Yeah, all right. Bye.